So many people complained, oh, I missed NVIDIA on this huge run. I missed Amazon. You look at those Mag 7 names, those names that lead us higher, and when we rally, those are the names that are probably going to bounce back the most. I look at NVIDIA down 25% from its peak. It was down over 30% at one point. They have a big event next week. For a tradable bounce, you get back to the 200-day moving average, which it's below. That's a 10% rally from here.
One of the big questions about this entire sort of space right now is obviously NVIDIA making a small fortune because everyone's actually buying with cash those chips. A lot of the businesses that are buying those chips or access to those chips aren't necessarily making money themselves. How long can this go on?
Well, I think what we're seeing is in 2024, there was a lot of experimentation by businesses and consumers. It was really developing a new habit, learning how to use things like ChatGPT. But all of the curves that we see for what we call consumption, as opposed to the training, which costs a lot of money even today, as the models every 18 months improve by another doubling or another order of magnitude, there's billions of dollars that will be required to train the highly intelligent models on the frontier. Right. However, once those models are launched, the amount of demand, ongoing consumption that can happen, that curve is increasing at a much faster rate than the cost of training the new models. So we think over time, those curves are going to cross, and when you get enough consumption for each of these more intelligent models, they're the margins that can be gotten by businesses for doing what's called inference as opposed to training. Those margins look like they'll be sustainable, and it's really about getting to high volumes, and we think that will happen. It takes time for these technologies to get absorbed into the market, and for businesses to integrate them into their current application stacks, for consumers to start changing behavior. So for all of those reasons, though, the front end of that, it looks like a kind of a tidal wave coming in of additional demand and consumption that we're going to see for these technologies. So I think as that curve starts to play out over the next even 6 and 12 and 18 months, you will start to see that the ability to make margin from doing inference on these NVIDIA chips is going to be there for businesses that are selling AI.
We've got the Super Bowl of semis coming up next week with NVIDIA's GTC event. It's quite possible they give some commentary, some insight into what's happening in 26. But I think for the AI trade, what is absolutely important is, do CapEx budgets go up in 26, and what's their conviction of that? If that's the case, if 26 budgets are up, the AI stocks will all be up.
Just thinking about end markets, Chris, gaming, auto, PC, mobile, data center. It feels like data center's going to have to carry a lot of water, is it not?
It will, and it does. And again, from the broader space, what you're hoping for is, we finally get this cyclical recovery. And what happened in semis is, post-pandemic, customers just built up way too much inventory. People were just too optimistic. And it's taken 2 years to get to the point where, for example, Analog Devices said in their earnings that we think we're finally through the inventory correction. So if you do get some GDP help, some macro recovery in the second half of the year, well, then you get two benefits. This is always the benefit of a positive semi cycle. You get, improving demand, and then the fact that customers have to put inventory back on the shelves. Auto is another example where some of the tier ones in auto have taken their inventory all the way down to 2 weeks, where 2 years ago they said, we'll never do that again. We'll keep our inventory high. We don't get any shortage. And now they've gone the other way. If you start to get some better feeling about end demand, well, they have to put that inventory back into place. And really that's the concern. And frankly, a couple weeks ago, before some of the trade and tariff scares, there was a lot of optimism for that being the case.
What do you think Jensen Huang says at GTC, Chris? And I'm wondering, were there any unanswered questions after NVIDIA's earnings call that you unanswered at this event?
Yeah, so most of what GTC is talking about their particular product cycles. One of the things that was at least a question after earnings was, you didn't see the level of upside in NVIDIA's guidance that we've seen in the past. I think they did answer the question. It's about the transition to the new Blackwell cycle, and there's some new products coming out. We're optimistic with that in the second half of the year, and I'm very confident that he's confident in that as well. But what people want to see, the conviction people want to see is, does this continue? And really kind of two things. One is, what kind of ROI are NVIDIA's customers getting on the money they're spending right now? And then secondly, the level of conviction that that spending, the CapEx, is going to go up in 26. That's really what people want to hear.
Are you above or below consensus when it comes to their 25 margins?
Well, we're above with regard to the 25, 26 with regard to earnings. For margins, they've had a little bit of a downtick. Again, it's associated with that new Blackwell ramp. So generally what happens with NVIDIA is when they launch the new product, gross margins come down a little bit. Management's guided that to be back up in the back half of the year when, the new Blackwell becomes more mature. So margins we're pretty comfortable with.
We're underweight Amazon and NVIDIA, but Scott, we've been talking about buying those. We bought Amazon early this year because it trades at a discount to its history quite significantly. We've been buying NVIDIA. I think anytime NVIDIA trades to a price level where it makes sense, and we don't own Tesla. And here's the thing. I think everybody paints these with the same brush. These are fundamentally different businesses that get wrapped together because of the way markets are constructed right now. You can buy some of these names very, very attractively given their longer-term fundamentals. I mean, NVIDIA is cheap relative to its history, assuming that the earnings hold up, there's no competitive threat, there's no threat to exports. But those are the things that the news gives you an opportunity to buy. I'm not just buying the Mag 7.
Well, and NVIDIA's got this big event next week, so why not?
I mean, it's hard not to like NVIDIA now more than you did at the beginning of the year, right? Stock's down a lot. And what the main data that came out of Morgan Stanley's tech conference a couple weeks ago was everyone said their capital spending plans are still intact. So if I'm worried, which I am a little bit about revenue for other companies in the market, I'm a little bit less worried about NVIDIA's. Then I guess the relative estimate achievability of NVIDIA's revenue is better than I thought, and their stock's down a lot. So sure, I like it more. I get that logic.
NVIDIA shares are higher today, though still down more than 20% from their record high just back in January. The company getting ready now for its big GTC event next week. Top chip analyst Stacy Rascon of Bernstein here with what you should expect from that. It's good to see you. Welcome back.
Good to be here.
As you look ahead to next week, just let's look at what happened to this stock of late. I mean, how should investors feel about it, the ones who love it the most?
Yeah, so I think I heard in your prior segment, if you liked it before, you should love it now. I've been a little, I guess maybe surprised is the wrong word, but I mean, I've been a little surprised at the magnitude of the decline. And I get it. The whole AI space has kind of rolled over somewhat on DeepSeek and macro and tariffs and just a broader degrossing. And I get all that. At the same time, NVIDIA, I mean, we're right at the beginning of their Blackwell product cycle. It has just started. It is likely to be the biggest product cycle in their history. We'll likely get some more updates on that next week at GTC. We'll probably also get our first look at Rubin, which is the next generation. We may even get a little look at what comes after Rubin. They may talk about co-packaged optics. They may talk about quantum. They may talk about ARM PCs. They'll probably talk about robotics and every physical AI and everything they talked about at CES. I think it still looks really, really good. And at these current valuations, I mean, it went down to 23 times earnings. It's about 25 now. It's at trough valuations. You've been really, really good buying it there, like historically. I think over the last 10 years, if you bought it at 25 times or below, your average one-year return from that moment was like 150%, and it's never had a negative drawdown over a one-year period buying it under those. I really like it at these valuations in the beginning of a product cycle and with their their conference of the year starting next week. Yeah.
How do we know? I guess I'd ask it this way. I'm the investor. I love NVIDIA. I believe everything that you said. I'm a huge fan of the stock. I agree with you. It's come down. It was never that expensive. Blah blah blah. The whole story, right? That's gotten the stock to where it is. But the DeepSeek thing changed the way that I think I should think about the future, perhaps for this company. Whether it's just going to change the amount of money that needs to be spent, whether it changes the dynamic of the kind of chips that need to be used. And it's just too early to say that it's not going to have a tremendous impact.
But it's already had an impact. But what impact has it had? It's been a positive impact, not a negative impact. This was my read on we talked about this, I think, during that circus.
I know we did, but has it already had that? Just because Satya Nadella and others like you come out and say, well, it's going to lead to more compute, which leads to more chips and blah, blah, blah. I mean.
But what's happened since then? So we've seen H20 like inventory, like in public cloud, inventory has gone down. H20 rental prices, I'm sorry, H100, excuse me, inventory has gone down. H100 rental prices have come up. H20, their China sales, like their sales of their China legal parts into China, there's a ton more demand, like on the back of DeepSeek. They need more compute, not less compute. All of the hyperscalers and everybody else has been taking their CapEx numbers up by leaps and bounds this year. Again, I think from your prior segment, what I think came out of some of the conferences in this latest season is that those spending plans are still very, very intact. If anything, we've seen increases in demand, not decreases from and since DeepSeek, and that's been my view. But I thought it was positive. Again, the market clearly disagreed, but I think it was good. I think the prevalence of more cost-effective models drives adoption. That's been one of the big barriers to adoption by software companies and the like. It's cost. If we can actually get effective, lower cost models that drive adoption everywhere, how is that not a good thing? I think it's a good thing.
Are the spending numbers from the hyperscalers recession-proof?
Look, I don't think anything is recession-proof in hardware. Like, don't get me wrong. But at the same time, I don't think what they're spending right now is to drive revenue right now. Like, these are long-term investments. They've got long-term visions. In some sense, it's almost existential too. So what we have seen is as they're spending on AI, like we've seen like spending on other things like decline. For example, you can look in the traditional server space. And I cover Intel and AMD, and you can look at just like the server CPUs. They've been very bad. Like frankly for the last several years, and particularly as AI and spending has shifted toward things like GPUs. Their spend has come out of other areas to focus on AI. I think if they start cutting, and I mean, look, in a recession, I think all bets are off, but this may be like lower down on the list, at least of investments to deprioritize.
I know, but as you talk about, they're spending for the longer term, I feel like we're getting a little less patient to some degree with that. Like we want the results to come sooner at this point. And if you do have a more dramatic economic slowdown, that could throw a wrench into what we thought even, 50 days ago.
Yeah, but that's not unique to AI or NVIDIA. That's just a fact, right? Recessions, economic uncertainty, tariffs that get put on and taken off like every other day. I mean, that's why the market multiples have come down. Like the earnings, by and large, have not come down nearly as much as any of the stocks have, right? It's all multiple. And why? It's because, in some sense, if things are more uncertain, you don't know what's going to happen, you're going to pay less for that stream of earnings. But that's not like specific to AI. That's a general issue that I think the entire market is facing right now.
I mean, and your point overall, before I let you go, is just tune out, look past the noise, because there's a lot of noise.
There's a lot of noise. I mean, I do my best to look past it. It's not always possible. Like sometimes the noise is the story. But there's a lot of noise out there right now. You got to do your best to at least try to see what else is there.
NVIDIA's move is the one that has the look of real money getting back in based on valuation, depending on your numbers. I mean, it basically got down to a market multiple. And so that one really seems like it could be a turn. The rest of them is just a matter of saying maybe these stocks can act as macro defense again.
NVIDIA actually had a good week overall, unlike the major indices, but it's also got a big week next week with GTC. How influential do you think NVIDIA is going to be with its news next week?
So, John, our concern with NVIDIA has been simply that it's been relying on a beat and raise dynamic with estimates for the past 6 months and has been laboring along that, right? But what you've done with this recent stock price setback, where you've sold the stock off, over 20% from peak to recent trough, is you begin to take some of that expectation out. So you get yourself to a point now where a reconfirmation that underlying trends are in place might just be sufficient to give the stock some renewed energy, at least on the short term.
So then how much of a potential tech industry catalyst, or I don't know what you want to call it, it might not be a catalyst, will NVIDIA's GTC be? Because they're not just talking about their own product, they're showcasing the possibilities involved with building on top of their technology.
That's right. So next week, GTC is the big event of AI for the year. Let's not forget, NVIDIA not only facilitates most of the progress in AI through their products, but is also really trying hard to cultivate the entire ecosystem around AI. They're going to promote LLM model companies. They're going to promote robotics companies. They're even going to promote quantum companies at a quantum day next week. And so they're trying to plant the seeds for these companies to leverage the NVIDIA product set to deliver more growth. So we're going to hear a lot more about that, and we'll hear more about NVIDIA's new products, Blackwell Ultra, Rubin that'll come out next year. And NVIDIA has a great opportunity to get the ecosystem excited about what can get built, even if it will take time.
Meantime, NVIDIA bouncing higher today, up more than 5%. The stock closing out the week with an 8% gain, making it the only Mag 7 stock up this week. Still, the AI darling is down more than 20% from its 52-week high. And next week, the company hosts its GTC conference in San Jose with a keynote from CEO Jensen Huang Tuesday and a quantum day on Thursday. Analysts looking for updates on NVIDIA's Blackwell Ultra and next-gen Rubin chips, as well as demand from China and a roadmap for its quantum computing plans. Karen, no doubt part of the run-up this week, at least, was anticipation of this major potential catalyst.
Right. But what I think, I don't know if he's going to address this, is how is demand right now? Right. For what's going on.
Has anything turned?
Yes. Has anything turned, and having a little bit more time, not a ton, but a little bit more time post DeepSeek? Do you think the world has changed? Stacey Raskin, I don't know if you heard him on in the prior hour or two, was saying he thought DeepSeek was a big positive. But clearly, the street thinks differently. I'd be very curious to hear Jensen's take on that, which I know he's saying inference is we need so much more compute for inference.
Yes.
Right. And so he, is touting that as a positive, which there's skepticism, though.
Right. Tim, you got your voice back?
Let's hope so. This has been a tough run here. Yes. What can I do for you?
NVIDIA and GTC. What are you expecting?
I do think this is an important moment for the stock. We got numbers, as we all know, a few weeks back, and those numbers were fine. But as we think about the drivers and what the DeepSeek impact is, there's no question that still NVIDIA is the only game in town. And I still think that CapEx spend is not something we should be challenging. GTC is going to be another data point, and I think it's important for the market. I like what the stock did on the chart this week. It was really important.
Do you remember when NVIDIA reported earnings, John Ford had an interview, a one-on-one interview with Jensen Huang after that report? And we were saying, Jensen Huang, he's always managed to come out and message the markets and stir the stock higher, and nothing happened. So what do you think this time?
Yeah, he's been an excellent salesperson for the name. I think this will be one of those Apple events where you sell it, on the day of, or you sell it coming out of it. But what I thought was interesting is they're having their first ever quantum day. And if you look at stocks like D-Wave, that was up 47% today. If you look at Rigetti, that was up 28% today. So watch those names out of it. They're trying to change from AI to quantum. I think that's very interesting.
How does NVIDIA stack up in your Mag 7 list?
Well, they're really dependent on your other Mag 7, right? Because what you need to see is the CapEx from these other companies need to continue to increase, which interestingly enough did even after DeepSeek. They pledged even more money to go back to chips, which has been a positive for NVIDIA. So I think you want to watch not just what they're going to say at this conference, but also is that CapEx going to continue to increase, especially if there is concerns about growth in the economy? Are they going to pull that back? I think that's a bigger indication to where NVIDIA is going.
All right, I hope you're all doing great today. The S&P finished the day about 2.1% higher, and NVIDIA finished the day nearly 5.3% higher. I'm looking forward to GTC next week, and I want to talk about NVIDIA in just a moment. Very quickly, though, I want to remind you that next week we have FOMC, and this is no ordinary FOMC meeting. This meeting will be extra important given the recent market sell-off, and because we get a summary of economic projections at this meeting, which will tell us where the Fed thinks inflation and interest rates will be by the end of this year. In other words, the SCB should tell us how many interest rate cuts the Fed thinks we'll get this year. So be prepared for that. and be prepared for some volatility in the market this Wednesday. Now let's talk about NVIDIA. I want to address a few things. I want to mention what we're expecting at GTC. Then I want to address Wall Street's lingering misunderstanding of DeepSeek. And thirdly, I want to talk about the long-term future of NVIDIA. All right, so what are we expecting from GTC? Well, NVIDIA leadership told us on the company's most recent earnings call that Jensen's keynote on March 18th will be a, quote, news-packed event where we will learn more about NVIDIA's upcoming products, including Blackwell Ultra, Rubin, and the next clip of product after Rubin. There's so many events scheduled for GTC next week that there's no way to mention all of them in one video. But the climax of next week will be Jensen's keynote on Tuesday. That keynote starts at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern this Tuesday. Then, the very next morning, NVIDIA will host a Financial Analyst Q&A on Wednesday starting at 8:30 a.m. Pacific, 11:30 a.m. Eastern. That Q&A session may also be a market-moving event, so be prepared for that on Wednesday morning. Overall, I'm optimistic heading into GTC, and hopefully after this event, analysts and managers on Wall Street will come to the realization that 2026 is likely to be yet another growth year for NVIDIA. There's still a lot of skepticism about that on Wall Street right now, but if market participants become convinced that 2026 is going to be another growth year for NVIDIA, then that could really add some positive momentum back into the stock over the coming months. All right, now, let's talk about DeepSeek. I feel like a broken record, but as you just heard in multiple of the clips you just watched, many analysts, managers, and market participants still do not realize that DeepSeek's models are not a problem for NVIDIA. Shortly after the DeepSeek sell-off earlier this year, I said repeatedly that I thought DeepSeek had a large quantity of high-end NVIDIA GPUs and that they had a budget much, much larger than $6 million. And now we've learned that that is most likely the case, with semi-analysis suggesting DeepSeek had 50,000 NVIDIA Hopper GPUs and a budget of $1.6 billion. And if that is correct, then the DeepSeek sell-off earlier this year was completely unjustified and misguided. And following DeepSeek's surge in popularity, we saw that DeepSeek's R1 model actually helped fuel a lot of demand for NVIDIA's products. And so again, I want to remind you that DeepSeek's models are actually a good thing for NVIDIA. Now you might be wondering, why am I bringing this up right now? Well, there are many reports circulating online saying that DeepSeek is rushing to launch its newest model sometime before early May. And as I've said in recent videos, there are unfortunately still a lot of fund managers and analysts on Wall Street that still think DeepSeek's models are bad for NVIDIA. And so when R2 is released, don't be surprised if it has a short-term negative impact on NVIDIA stock. I want you to be prepared in case that happens, and I want you to remember that DeepSeek's models are actually a good thing for NVIDIA in the long run, even if the market doesn't understand it yet. All right, now, finally, I want to talk about where things stand as of now with NVIDIA and look ahead with a long-term perspective. Right now, NVIDIA is scaling production of what will be their most profitable product to date. NVIDIA brought in $11 billion in Blackwell revenue in Q4, which is much more than the several billion expected, and they're working to expedite the manufacturing of Blackwell. Because NVIDIA is expediting manufacturing of Blackwell, margins have come down slightly in the short term, but they are expected to return back to the mid-70s later this year, which is fantastic. Blackwell Ultra is set to launch later this year, even as Blackwell is still ramping. And Jensen told us on NVIDIA's earnings call that the transition to Blackwell Ultra will be much easier and smoother than the transition to Blackwell. That means we are less likely to see delays in the rollout of Blackwell Ultra, and that is very good news. We've heard a lot of talk about potential competitors to NVIDIA, but the reality is that NVIDIA develops across the entire stack, both hardware and software, and they have a competitive moat that no other company is even close to breaching. And every time I hear analysts speculating about the hyperscalers reducing their capex, I can't help but think back to Jensen Huang's recent interview with CNBC, in which he explained that reasoning models that operate on Blackwell generate 25 times the amount of tokens generated by reasoning models operating on Hopper. That essentially means that AI factories that use Blackwell will see a 25x in revenue compared to AI factories that use Hopper. And so if NVIDIA is delivering performance upgrades that are this substantial, the hyperscalers are going to continue spending like crazy to buy NVIDIA's latest products in large quantities. Right now, we have to get through this tariff situation. We have to wait until market participants realize that 2026 will likely be another growth year for NVIDIA. And we have to wait until market participants finally understand that DeepSeek's models are actually good for NVIDIA. And so yes, in the short term, we're going to have to deal with volatility on a day-by-day basis. But be that as it may, we need to maintain a long-term perspective and not miss the forest for the trees. For all of the reasons I've mentioned in this video, and for many more, I'm bullish on the long-term future of NVIDIA. The line of sight is just so clear for this company's future, and there are, in my opinion, many things to like about NVIDIA right now. And so in the short term, it's important to tune out the noise and maintain a long-term view. At least those are my thoughts on the situation. Remember to stay calm in this market. Remember to maintain a long-term perspective, and do not make any hasty or irrational decisions. With all of that being said, I hope you all have a great weekend, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts about NVIDIA in the comments below. Please leave a like on this video so more people will see it. And while you're down there, please consider subscribing. It's free, and you can always change your mind. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video.